Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, or ADHD, is a common condition in school-aged children that causes different symptoms like inattention, hyperactivity, or impulsivity, among many others. One way to study ADHD is to look at brain size. The brain can be divided in many different ways, and comparing the size of different parts of the brain is one of the ways to know where these symptoms come from and where to aim treatments like meds or brain stimulation, because each one of these parts is responsible for something like memory or movement or inhibition. One of the ways to study brain size is to look at the cortex or outside of the brain separately from the subcortex or the core of the brain. We can look at the thickness of the cortex or the volume of the subcortex, which we'll focus on in this video. The subcortex can be divided into way more parts, and not all of them will be the same when looking at the brain of someone with ADHD versus the brain of someone without it. This doesn't mean that they're any less smart, it just means that these regions could be responsible for some of the symptoms. Knowing this, some structures can get bigger, which means that they're more active, or they can be smaller, which means that they're less active. And in a brain with ADHD, the parts of the subcortex that change the most are the hippocampus, the caudate, and the putamen. The hippocampus takes care of a lot of memory and knowing where things are, while the caudate and putamen work really close together to control movements and reward-based learning. The thing about these structures is that we know three things. Number one, the hippocampus is smaller in brains with ADHD. So are the caudate and putamen, but there's huge debate around that. Some scientists say smaller, others say bigger, others say it changes with age. There's big debate around that, and our lab is doing more research to settle this debate. Number two, this difference comes from slightly slower development of these structures, and we think this happens because of a mix of two things: genetics, or what you inherit from your parents, and the environment you grow up in. This is also one of the reasons why the biggest difference between brain regions and symptom severity seems to be in childhood. Number three, the size difference seems to be what causes the symptoms, not the other way around. In science, we actually have way more questions than answers, which is why it's so important that we do more research to cement what we know and figure out what we don't.